A franchise that hasn't had a new game in over 20 years has finally made a return and is so big and no one's talking about it. And that's right, you guessed it, we're talking about Stuntman. Oh, what did you think I was talking about? Spyro? What the f*** is that? Nah, Stuntman! At PlayStation's State of Play, they announced the biggest franchise return in history out of nowhere.
And cut! Great take. Think we got it.
Yep, roll playback.
Stuntman Hollywood is the return of the Stuntman franchise in almost 20 years, which is just crazy to think about, and I would have never seen this coming at the State of Play. Before Dark Souls became the internet's favorite way to describe any game that hates you, there was a driving game on PS2 that was already doing that exact thing. Except instead of fighting demons, you were fighting the director on every stunt. Instead of learning boss patterns, you were memorizing stunt sequences. And instead of dying to a giant skeleton with a sword, you were failing because your car landed 3 inches to the left. Oh, and did I mention it has the best menu music that ever existed? Oh yeah.
Califragilistic, when we drop, you go ballistic.
This was Stuntman, a game that looked like it was about doing cool Hollywood car chases, but was actually about repeating the same 45-second stunt sequence until your brain literally melted. And now, after almost 20 years of silence, Stuntman is somehow back with a new game called Stuntman Hollywood. And I feel like barely anyone is talking about how insane this is. This literally came out of nowhere. Because this game just isn't a random racing game, this is one of the most original, frustrating, satisfying, controller-gripping driving games of the PS2 era. So today, I want to go back through the history of Stuntman, where it came from, why people loved it, and why it made some people want to throw their PS2 out the window, why the sequel didn't save it, and why its return is a bigger deal than what people realize. The early 2000s were a weird, magical time for driving games. You had Gran Turismo 3 for the serious car people. Need for Speed Underground was about to turn every teenager into a street racing expert. Burnout was starting to figure out the crashing could be more fun than winning. And then you had Driver, which was kind of its own thing. Cinematic car chases, big city driving, 70s crime movie energy, and that game felt like somebody made a playable car chase scene. So it made sense that Stuntman came from Reflections Interaction, the same studio behind Driver. The original Stuntman released on PS2 in 2002, developed by Reflections and published by Infogames/Atari. And the idea was honestly genius. Instead of being a racer, you were a movie stunt driver. You weren't trying to finish first, you were trying to hit marks, crash through boxes, jump ramps, drift around corners, swerve around explosions, and do every little thing exactly the way the director wanted you to do it. That one concept made Stuntman feel different than basically any other driving game at the time. Because most racing games ask, can you go fast? Stuntman asks, can you go fast? Turn left at the exact second we tell you, hit a ramp at the correct angle, land without flipping, smash through a fake fruit cart, dodge a bus, stop inside a tiny box while the director screams at you. And honestly, that is way scarier than a final boss. The original Stuntman follows the career as a stunt driver working through fake movies. And that structure was one of the coolest parts of the games. Each movie had its own theme. You weren't just doing random driving challenges, you were filming scenes for fictional action movies inspired by real movie genres. There were spy movies, disaster movies, Indiana Jones style adventure movies, action chase scenes, and between missions, the game would show you movie trailers built around the stunts that you completed. That was such a smart reward, because after you finally survived one of the nightmare sequences, the game would actually go, hey look, you actually made a movie scene. And for 2002, that felt awesome. Wired described the game at the time as putting players behind the wheel in 6 movie scenarios, with stunts like launching off ramps, driving through flaming hoops, and earning trailer-style rewards after finishing production. But the thing everyone remembers about Stuntman is not just the concept, it was the difficulty. Because this game was brutal. Not always because the driving was impossible, but because the game demanded precision in a way that most driving games didn't. You weren't just steering, you were performing. The director could call out instructions in real time. Hard left, hit the boxes, overtake that truck, jump the ramp, slide through the gap. And if you miss one instructions, that was it, at least for a perfectly good run. Sometimes you could finish the scene, but you already knew. You felt it in your soul. You missed that one stunt. You weren't getting the score, so restart. And that is why I call this the Dark Soul of driving games. Not because it has stamina bars or bonfires, but because the only way forward was learning the sequences through pain. You failed, you restarted, you failed again, you restarted again, you learn the timing, you learn the corner, you learn where the ramp was, you learn which instructions was coming next, and eventually, after what felt like 80 attempts, you finally nail that run. And that feeling was the magic. Because Stuntman was frustrating, but it was also rewarding in a very specific way. It gave you the feeling of finally completing a scene that once felt impossible. The problem is, the game had one enemy that was more powerful than any missed ramp: the loading times. Here's the thing that younger players may not understand. When you fail a mission in modern games, you usually restart instantly. Maybe you wait 2 seconds. Maybe the game reloads you at a checkpoint. But in Stuntman on PS2, you failed, you waited. And waited. And waited. And then you tried again. And then you missed that box from the first 10 seconds. And guess what? You waited again. That part made the original Stuntman go from challenging to psychological warfare. Metacritic's archive has the PS2 version at a 71 critic score, with common player complaints about the difficulty and load times. And honestly, that score makes sense, because critics and players were split in a way that feels very believable. Some people saw a wildly original driving game, and other people saw a great idea buried under repetition and frustration. And both sides were kinda right. Stuntman was creative, it was stylish, it had a killer premise, but it was also the kind of game where one tiny mistake could cost you the whole scene. And when you combine that with long reloads, suddenly the game doesn't just test your skill, it tests your patience. This is why Stuntman became one of those games people remember with two completely different emotions at the same time. They remember loving it, and they remember hating it. And sometimes in the same sentence. So why did people keep playing? Well, it's because no one was making games like this. That's the thing. There were better racing games. There were smoother driving games. There were games with better handling, better frame rates, better progression, better everything. But then there weren't many games that made you feel like you were literally filming a car chase. And that was Stuntman's hook. The game had a weird rhythm to it. At first, every mission felt chaotic. You didn't know where to go, you didn't know what the director was gonna call out, you were reacting too late to everything. But after enough attempts, something clicked. The scene stopped being random, it became choreography. You weren't driving anymore, you were dancing with the car. And that is such a unique feeling. Most racing games reward instinct. Stuntman reward rehearsal. You had to memorize the scene like an actor memorizing lines. The first run was the table read, the second run was rehearsal, the 10th run was when you started to understand the blocking, and the perfect run was opening night. And that's what made Stuntman special. It was not really a racing game, it was a performance game disguised as a driving game. So eventually, 5 years later, the series finally came back with Stuntman Ignition in 2007. But this time, things were a little different. The original game had been developed by Reflections. The sequel was developed by Paradigm Entertainment and published by THQ, releasing in 2007 for the PS2, PS3, Xbox 360, and mobile. And Ignition was clearly trying to fix some of the pain points of the first game. It was flashier, it was faster, it was more forgiving, it leaned harder into Hollywood spectacle. The fake movies were bigger, more ridiculous. You had disaster movies, spy movies, action movies, and all of these over-the-top scenes with explosions everywhere. And most importantly, the game understood something the first game struggled with. Failing needed to be less miserable. Ignition still had the same basic idea. Hit the stunt markers, follow the director's calls, chain together stunts. Don't mess up the scene. But it made the whole thing flow better. It introduced a combo system where keeping the action going mattered. Instead of feeling like you were just obeying a checklist, you were building momentum. You were trying to keep the stunt chain alive. That was a smart change because it made the game feel less like a test and more like a performance. In a lot of ways, Stuntman Ignition is probably the easier game to recommend today. It's more playable, it's more modern, it has a little more polish, and it doesn't feel quite as openly hostile as the PS2 original. But here's the sad part. It didn't save the series. And in a lot of ways, I understand why some people would prefer it. But personally, I never liked it as much as the first Stuntman. And the reason is pretty simple. Stuntman Ignition feels more like a video game. The original Stuntman made you feel like you were performing a stunt for a movie. And that sounds like a small difference, but to me, that is the entire identity of the series. In the first game, the whole fantasy was that you were on a movie set, you were a stunt driver, you were doing takes, and you were trying to nail the scene. And then when you finally finish the movie, the game will reward you with a trailer using your stunts you actually performed in the game. That was a big payoff. You got to see your gameplay turn into the movie. That made all the frustrations feel worth it because it felt like you created something. But in Stuntman Ignition, the trailers are all pre-rendered. They are not really built out of your run the same way. And to me, that takes away one of the coolest parts of the first game. Because the whole point of Stuntman was not just beating a mission, it was filming the scene. When the game takes that away, it starts feeling less like you're making a movie and more you're just doing a driving challenge with a Hollywood skin over it. And that is where the scoreboard stuff kinda hurts the vibe for me too. The first game already had scores, obviously, but Ignition leans so much harder into the gamified side of things. The screen is constantly throwing numbers, multipliers, icons, prompts, markers, combo information all at you at once. And I get why. The stunt stringing system is actually a pretty cool idea. I do like that a lot. Having to chain your stunts together and keeping the momentum going is an interesting evolution of the formula. It gives the driving more rhythm, and when it works, it makes the scenes feel a lot more exciting. But there is just way too much shit on the screen. It feels like the game is constantly reminding you that you're playing a game. And for me, that slightly breaks the illusion, because I don't want Stuntman to feel like an arcade racer where I'm chasing a combo meter. I want it to feel like I'm on a movie set trying to survive the most ridiculous car chase ever filmed. That is the weird balance Ignition struggles with. It probably plays better than the first game, but I don't think it captures the same magic. The original Stuntman was clunky, brutal, and sometimes flat out unfair, but when it worked, it felt like you were performing. Ignition is more polished, but it feels more like it is asking you to complete specific driving challenges. And that difference matters, because the fantasy of Stuntman was never just drive through the markers. The fantasy was action, hit the jump, crash through the boxes, miss the explosion, and cut. And then seeing that chaos turn into the trailer, that was the soul of the first game. And even though Ignition added some smart ideas, I think it lost a little bit of the soul along the way. Stuntman Ignition reviewed better than you might expected, especially on the Xbox 360 and PS3, where Metacritic lists it in generally favorable range. But good reviews were not enough. Early 2008, THQ had decided to cut the Stuntman and Juice franchises after poor performance from Stuntman Ignition and Juice 2. Wire reported that THQ was canceling several projects and shifting focus after those titles underperformed. Later that same year, THQ closed multiple studios, including Paradigm Entertainment, the developer of Stuntman Ignition. And just like that, poof, Stuntman was gone. No trilogy, no remaster, no spiritual successor that really took over, nothing. For almost 20 years, this series just disappeared into the same retro gaming void where we keep all of our weird, risky, mid-budget games that publishers didn't really make anymore. And honestly, that's the biggest reason Stuntman still feels interesting. It belongs to a very specific era. An era where publishers would look at a game and say, what if we made a driving game where you're not just racing, but instead doing precision stunt work for fake movies? That is just such a PS2 era idea. And I mean that as a compliment. It's weird, it's specific, it's memorable, and it's not trying to be everything for everyone. It has one idea, and it commits to that idea so hard that it becomes both brilliant and annoying. That is the kind of game that people get nostalgic for. Not because it was perfect, but because nothing felt exactly like it. Over time, Stuntman became one of those games people randomly remembered. It's not usually listed next to all-time great racing games. It's not Gran Turismo, it's not Need for Speed, it's not Burnout 3, but when people who played a Stuntman talk about it, there is usually this specific reaction. First they go, oh my god, I remember that game. And then they go, yeah, that game was pretty hard. And then they go, yeah, but I kinda love it, it was good. And that is the entire legacy of Stuntman in 3 sentences. It was a game that made you suffer, but in a way you somehow respected. It had that same appeal of trying to get the perfect Tony Hawk combo or trying to hit S rank in Mercenaries on Resident Evil. The fun wasn't just beating the mission, the fun was mastering it. And that is why Stuntman deserves to be remembered. Because long before every game was chasing live service mechanics, open worlds, battle passes, 200-hour checklists, Stuntman had a very simple promise. Here's the scene, here's a car, here's everything that needs to happen. Now make it look cool. And if you can't, do it again. And now, somehow, some way, Stuntman is back. In 2026, Stuntman Hollywood was announced as a new entry from Saber Interactive. It is currently planned for PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X and S, with no release date announced as of yet. And the wildest part is this new game is not doing fake movie parodies anymore. It is using actual Universal and NBC Universal properties. The PlayStation blog announcement mentions Fast and Furious, Back to the Future, Knight Rider, and more as part of the game's movies and TV's inspired stunt setup. And that is a huge shift, because the original Stuntman had fake movies that were clearly inspired by real ones. But Stuntman Hollywood is basically saying, what if you could actually do the stunts with iconic movies and TV vehicles? That would literally be incredible. Imagine a modern Stuntman with instant restarts, better physics, a good replay editor, online leaderboards, movie license missions, a sandbox stunt creator, and the ability to make your own ridiculous action scenes. That could work so well today. Honestly, this series might make more sense now than it did back then. Because we live in an age of clips, people love posting insane gameplay moments. People love challenge runs. A modern Stuntman could be built for that. Every perfect run could become a clip. Every failed jump could become a meme. Every mission could be a blend of puzzles, racing, performance, and action movie nonsense. But the big question is, will it remember what made Stuntman special? Because this series should not just become a generic arcade racer with movie skins. The whole point of Stuntman is precision. It's choreographed. It's a pressure of knowing you have one shot to make the scene look right. The new game needs to be smoother and less punishing than the PS2 original, obviously. But it can't lose the tension, because that tension is the identity. Without that, it's just another driving game. So, if Stuntman Hollywood brings this series back properly, I think it needs to nail a few things. First, instant restarts. This is non-negotiable. The original game's biggest problem was not just failing, it was waiting after failing. A modern Stuntman needs to let you restart immediately. No punishment, no loading screens, just one button and you're back at the start. Second, the missions need to be readable. One of the hardest parts of the original was not always knowing what the game wanted from you until you already had failed. A modern version could still be difficult, but it should communicate it clearly. Show stunt lines, show timings, let the player understand why they failed, because difficulty feels good when it feels fair. Third, the game needs a great replay system. This feels obvious. You are literally filming stunts. Let the player watch their runs like a movie scene. Add camera cuts, add slow motion, let people export clips. Let us turn our dumb failures into beautiful action movie nonsense. Fourth, the stunt construction needs to come back in a big way. The original had a stunt construction mode, and the idea is perfect for today. Give players tools. Let them build insane stunt parks. Let them share scenes online. Let people make their own ridiculous movie challenges. That alone could give the game a long life. And fifth, it needs personality. The fake directors, the cheesy movie premises, the over-the-top announcer energy, that stuff matters. Stuntman should feel like Hollywood nonsense. It should feel like a game made by people who love action movies, car chases, explosions, and the absolute stupidity of launching a car through a billboard because it looks fucking dope. Stuntman is just one of those games that probably shouldn't have worked as well as it did. It was too hard, it was repetitive, it had painful loading times. It asked for a level of precisions that made some players quit before they ever got to the good stuff. But it was also original, it was memorable, and it had an identity that most driving games still don't have today. It understood that a car chase was not just about speed, it's about timing, it's about danger, it's about spectacle, it's about making something look impossible on camera. And that's why people still remember Stuntman. Not because it was perfect, but because it was different. And now that Stuntman Hollywood is real, I really hope Saber understands what they're bringing back. Because the series was never about driving. It was about failing a stunt 30 times and then finally landing it perfectly. And the feeling that you just filmed the coolest scene in a movie. So yeah, the Dark Souls of driving games is back, baby. So, were you actually one of the people who played Stuntman back in the day? And more importantly, did you ever beat it without losing your mind? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more videos about weird, forgotten retro games, then subscribe here, and I will see you guys in another video. Bye!